Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the WhatsOnStage Podcast with me, Alex Wood.
And me, Sarah Crompton.
Sarah, where are you in the world? This is very exciting.
I am in Sag Harbor, New York State, which is very exciting. I spent yesterday walking along a deserted beach in beautiful sunlight, watching seagulls and ships. It's very, very nice indeed. And I have been in New York, and I'm actually here for a wedding mainly, but I've also been looking at American ballet theatre in my other hat as a dance writer, and that was great joy, watching a programme dedicated to Twyla Tharp, the great choreographer who is celebrating 60 years of dance making, which is really something. So I've had an absolutely terrific time, and it's sort of holiday, sort of work. But it's very, very nice, whatever it is.
Isn't it really satisfying when you can combine work and pleasure on one trip?
So good. It's so good. And I am loving it. And I do always love being in New York, particularly. I danced around really good. Oh, it's so exciting to be here. And of course, there's loads coming up on Broadway that I won't see. I'm very sorry to say. And I keep trying to slightly say, I could just fit that in. And then realising that actually I'm here to go to a wedding. So I need to get on with that.
Yeah. You've restrained yourself, but you have dipped your toe into the Broadway pool, as we will get onto later.
Indeed we will. So what are we going to talk about?
Packed agenda yet again. So we were going to talk about the very exciting news about a Hollywood star, Chris Pine, coming to the London stage for the very first time. Then we were going to dilly-dally on your Broadway experiences at Waiting for Godot with Keanu Reeves and Alex Winter. Then we were going to alight on the subject of first previews, which has come up with The Hunger Games, which started its performances this week. And I also wanted to maybe mention the Broadway strike, which by the time this goes out, we might know if Broadway musicians have gone on strike, because they will have decided this week if they want to bring Broadway to a halt, which could be a big moment for the industry at a time when Broadway is already in pretty precarious circumstances. But yes, should we start with Chris Pine?
So yes, let's start with Chris Pine. Quite exciting news. I got overexcited because I thought it was a different Chris. I've always had a problem with the Chris's. And on the plane over to the States, I watched Materialists with Chris Evans. So I had a moment where I thought, yes, that man from Materialists. But this is the man from Star Trek.
Yes.
And lots to be excited about with him coming to do this play. Interesting play for him to choose.
Definitely not one of your knight in shining armour kind of roles that he has tended to play in his film career, but a messy, tricky offering, Chekhov's Ivanov, which hasn't been seen on the London stage for quite a while, I think.
Yes, and a wonderful part for an actor, I think. I can absolutely see why Chris Pine wants to do it. I've only seen this quite a lot. I think the last time it was on the London stage and was on stage in the UK generally was in 2015 as part of David Hare's Young Chekhov season, which yoked it with Platonov and The Seagull. And that was Samuel West doing it. I also saw Kenneth Branagh do it. Quite a dark version, as I remember. Ian McKellen did it when it was called Wild Honey and written by Michael Frayn. Brilliant adaptation, really suited McKellen, who was quite old to do it when he did it. And then, oddly, here's my curveball. Weirdly, I saw Ethan Hawke do a version of it off Broadway years ago, and he was brilliant, and I utterly loved the way he did it. And he did it in that, in fact, incredibly, I wrote a piece about it at the time, incredibly American way, I felt, of sort of detailed, absolutely lived-in acting, which contrasted so much with Branagh, who was very much the English school and all out there. So I can absolutely see why Chris Pine wants to do this play. And interestingly, he's doing it with Simon Stone.
Yes, he said the Bridge Theatre, where the revival is being staged late next summer, they put out a video with Chris Pine saying the big draw for him was the fact that he gets to in his words, workshop Chekhov with Simon Stone, which reflects Simon Stone's very organic way of creating plays, as is currently evidenced with the ongoing production of The Lady from the Sea, which is playing at the Bridge, where Stone sort of muddles his way through the text and forms it as the rehearsal process continues, rather than creating the text first, then taking it into the rehearsal room. And I think actors are really drawn to that because it really means they can invest themselves into the production and find their own way through and find some sort of creative investment that they might not have if they just get presented with a script and have to learn the lines and it's a top-down hierarchy. Also very interesting that the Bridge and Simon Stone have got 2 plays in 2 years together.
Yeah.
That's a great thing.
No, and I think that is exciting. As I said in my review of Lady from the Sea, my feeling about Simon Stone is I'd always rather have him taking risks than yet another production where no risks are taken. And I don't think Lady from the Sea is perfect, but I think I found it utterly fascinating, and I had this really riveting night in the theatre. I really enjoyed it. There wasn't a moment where I wasn't leaning in, even if I was arguing with him about what he'd done. And I think that is his quality as an adapter. And he sometimes absolutely hits the mark. We all think, I think, that Yerma with Billy Piper found a perfect match for Yerma's concerns about childlessness in a modern woman struggling with IVF. And I think it absolutely worked. Lady from the Sea, I think, struggles a little more to make the exact, to create those synergies. But I think Ivanov is a really interesting one for him to be taking on, partly because the text is more fluid in any case, which is why Frayne could do a very free version in Wild Honey, because Chekhov himself wrote 2 versions to play. It's a very early play, and it wasn't a success, and he adapted it later. So there are 2 versions of the script to begin with. And also, I just think it is that whole thing about, the superfluous man, this man who has no purpose in life, who's wandering around constantly in the grip of an existential crisis while terrible events unfold around him. And I think I feel that's a very Simon Stoney theme somehow.
It's surprisingly feels as though it is in conversation with The Lady from the Sea. And you're kind of pitting Ibsen and Chekhov together as 2 sort of figures in conversation. They're similar themes in terms of having this patriarch at the head of a household that feels lost, or there's themes of infidelity that come up, or intergenerational romance, mortality and illness. So it's very cool in a way that it's almost he's created a sequel for himself that's going to be playing on the same stage. Maybe there won't be as much water in this version as there is in The Lady from the Sea.
That's lots of water in Ivanov.
Yeah, no. Maybe there'll be snow or something instead. Who knows? So I really think that it's great programming from the Bridge, and it's great that Simon Stone wants to keep creating work on the South Bank with big stars that also want to work with him. Great for UK theatre. You can imagine Chris Pine's face will be plastered all over those 2026 preview pieces that come out later this year.
Yeah, and be interesting to see him on stage. And the other thing you were saying is that we are living, Simon Stone thinks we're living in a Chekhovian world, that more and more Chekhov seems to, and I think that there is something interesting in that. I think it's really interesting that the 2 playwrights who are being most revived are Ibsen, who essentially represents the public arena of debate. It seems to me that that's what Ibsen quite often does, of flinging a major theme into a play, whereas Chekhov just reflects that sense of life drifting and of people absolutely being unable to chart a way in a world that's confusing and changing. I mean, that's the key thing about Chekhov, isn't it? Underneath all of the plays is this incredible sense of the rush of social change. And that feels absolutely right, that's why we are watching him over and over again. And he does move, partly because of his insight, but partly because of his themes, very easily into the 21st century.
So shall we pivot from Chekhov to Beckett to now talk about the show that you saw
Yes.
on Broadway? So you saw Jamie Lloyd's revival of Waiting for Godot, starring two very big names. Do you want to talk a bit about your thoughts on that show?
Yes, the whole purpose of this version of Waiting for Godot by Jamie Lloyd was that it would reunite Keanu Reeves and Alex Winter, who found fame in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure and have remained firm friends ever since. So I think they approached Jamie Lloyd to do it because they wanted to do something together and they wanted to mark their friendship at some levels. And that's really interesting idea, that you make the friendship the heart of Godot. But oddly, it doesn't quite come through, or at least I felt in the performance I saw. It's really good. It looks amazing. Sutra Gilmore has produced this kind of funnel which all the characters perform within. And it enables some moments of very clever physical comedy where there's a lot of falling down in Godot, and it means that they can't get up because they're on the sides of the sewage pipe, is what it feels like. So they are actually within a sewage pipe. So it's clever, all that, and it's wonderfully lit by John Clark, and he quite often puts them into silhouette. So it's an intelligent and entertaining production, and it's got little hints of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, which the audience get and they really love. But the odd thing is that they don't actually, on a stage, you didn't really until the very end feel the closeness, or I didn't, of the relationship between Reeves and Winter. So it struck me as peculiar that the whole reason for doing it somehow hasn't been foregrounded. And I don't know if that's just because it's quite an effectless production. It's very direct, and I wouldn't entirely know what its view of the play was. It doesn't, it just presents the words quite straight, but somehow it just missed for me. And as you know, I am a fan of Jamie Lloyd, and I really always wanted to work. And I didn't have a bad time. I was very, very pleased to see Keanu Reeves, particularly on stage, but didn't take off for me. And the person I was with, who'd never seen the play before, I felt slightly sorry for her because it's not very inflected. So how they do it is quite direct and plain. And when I think about Ben Whishaw and Lucia Massamati, which I had seen very recently and which I did think was one of the best Godots I'd ever seen, I felt that they made each word work very hard. And I didn't really feel that here.
You are one of the few people that can compare the West End and Broadway revivals. And I guess the Broadway revival has the hard job of following on from, like you say, the best version of Waiting for Godot that you've ever seen.
Yeah, no, really hard and really difficult. But what struck me again, and what was the pleasure in watching it, it was interesting because it was the day I went was on the day of the No Kings Here March. So the whole of Broadway was that was happening in Times Square. So the whole of Broadway was blocked by this massive demonstration, and I was slightly anxious about getting to theatre. And it was such a classic New York moment that there was this very, very big demonstration going on, but it was beautifully policed. It was incredibly organised. It was pushed into a very small area. It actually made getting to the theatre slightly easier because it closed all the roads, so you could just walk down the middle of the street. And then all the theatre goers, all the tourists were sort of going on around it. And I thought it was kind of absolute classic New York moment. But it was interesting with that outside seeing Beckett, who is essentially not political ever, but he has got this incredible sense of just the need to endure, I think, and that again, that existential gloom that surrounds his plays, that simple message of just putting one foot in front of the other and carrying on and waiting and persisting. And that did come through very strongly in this version. There was a sense, it's a very bleak version.
It's would you say it's a departure from Jamie Lloyd at all, or did you feel like it was very much in the same vein as his other productions?
Still doesn't use any props. They're still miming eating a carrot.
There aren't that many props in
They don't have a carrot. They don't have a whip. Maybe that's good
true.
that they don't have the whip. Slightly more confusingly, they mime the scene where Pozo pulls Lucky by the neck. Interestingly, Lucky is in a wheelchair. That is interesting. So Michael Patrick Thornton, who plays him, is in a wheelchair. And that does change the dynamic between Lucky and Pozo and makes both scenes of domination and submission even more upsetting in a way. And I thought that was really clever. I liked that. So yeah, it was really interesting, but not one of my classics. But it does make me think. I'd like to see a bit more Beckett at the moment. If we're living in a Chekhov world, I do think we're living in a Beckett world as well. And I quite like to have see a few more people have a go. And what also struck me, sorry, rambling, but what also struck me was that business that the Beckett estate used to control everything so tightly and not allow any production to vary from the stage directions, and famously stopped Fiona Shaw doing footfalls because she moved and instead of sitting still. And I think obviously there has been a slight slackening because this doesn't have a tree. It is presented in a sewage channel. It's got a leading actor in a wheelchair. I mean, it seemed to me that there must be a little lessening going on, and I quite liked that to happen with Beckett and to let the plays come out of those very tight stage directions and see where they land.
I guess we've also recently had Gary Oldman in Crap's Last Tape over at York Theatre Royal, so maybe the celebs are also being drawn to Beckett, and possibly in the future we'll see some big other Becketts.
Stephen Ray's here, I think, on doing Crap's Last Tape on Broadway at the moment. So yes, there is. And they're harder. I mean, you couldn't ever fling Simon Stone at Beckett because you can't rewrite. I mean, you can't rewrite it. The words are what the plays are in because they're really poems, I think. But I would like to see a bit more. Quite like to see someone have a go at Endgame again. And
wasn't that was revived in Theatre Royal Bath, wasn't it? This year as well. With so
maybe that could
Beckett season.
Beckett coming in.
I imagine that will have more life in London. Theatre Royal Bath always look to the east whenever they programme.
Probably coming in. While we're on the subject of revivals, just tell me about The Maids, because you've seen that this week and I missed that.
Yes, I was. That was my theatre experience last night. Adapted and directed by Kip Williams, who was the pioneer behind the picture of Dorian Gray with Sarah Snook, which was a big success in the West End and on Broadway, and netted Sarah Snook all the awards that she could dream of. This is now taking Jean Genet's 1947 play and throwing a similar box of tricks at it. So with the picture of Dorian Gray, there was a lot of smartphone filters, video design, projection. All of that is sort of replicated in this production with a cast of 3, with 2 maids and the Madame, and the maids are conspiring to kill the Madame whilst also role-playing as the Madame and each other. There's a lot there that on paper sounds perfect because it's all about role-play, artifice, status, celebrity, and, with smartphones, Snapchat, Instagram, that's basically all those things work perfectly together because status, artifice are what social media are all about, aren't they? The number of friends that you have. In practice, I think it didn't work as well as the picture of Dorian Gray did. I think brilliant work from the cast of Lydia Wilson, Yerin Hart and Via Saban, really throwing themselves into these roles. And you can tell they were having so much fun whilst also fiddling around trying to get the right Snapchat filter up for their scenes. And actually, there was something really fun when, you have an actor holding up a smartphone to their face on selfie mode and say they're pretending to be a police officer or the Madame's boyfriend. They could change the filter so that on the screen behind them, you see them sort of like mimicking the boyfriend by putting on the filter of a handsome, chiseled man. That worked. That was really fun. And I think that there you're elevating Jean Genet's original conceit in a way that, he would never have imagined of when it was first written. But I think just as a text, The Maids is incredibly claustrophobic and doesn't have that same narrative momentum that worked so well for The Picture of Dorian Gray, which meant that it all felt like it was very repetitive and, yes, cyclical and ritualistic. But, you know, for people who live on social media, as I have the bad fortune of having to do, it didn't feel like it was telling me anything new that I didn't already know. Like, I know social media is bad. I know that it can be very intoxicating. I know that I feel isolated from people whilst talking to hundreds of them every day through Instagram or TikTok or whatever. And therefore, I just felt like, yes, great on paper, great first 15 minutes, but then I wanted something more, and I wanted to explore, you know, Genet ends at this point where he does explore what exactly the maid's escape from the Madame might be. And I don't think this play ever really managed that. It never really went beyond its original thesis, which was a shame. But I would say that it bodes very well for Dracula, which, if they employ a similar box of tricks next year when Cynthia Erivo takes on Bram Stoker's classic, which Kip Williams is also adapting, I'm even more excited for that production now, I think, having seen The Maids. So bad news for The Maids, good news for Cynthia Erivo.
I'll definitely go and see it when I get back, though, because when I was first studying theatre, the theatre of the absurd, so Beckett and Genet and UNESCO were always sort of lumped together as a movement. When I was studying English literature and theatre, everything was a movement. You were never allowed just to write a play. You had to fit in somewhere. Pinter, N.F. Simpson, they were all lumped in this idea that they were doing the same thing. And what's interesting as time passes is you realise they share superficial similarities, but they were all doing something slightly different, in fact, within that larger frame. And what I think is interesting is that, there's been the UNESCO revival this year with Rhinoceros, and UNESCO and Beckett seem to be timeless, because essentially he's just about how you live in the world. UNESCO, again, his political clout means that he does keep landing again and again, and people keep going back to him to look at how society copes with conformity, with dictatorships, with all those things. Jenny's the kind of tricky one, because when I was younger, I was really taken with Jenny, I think in a kind of slightly pretentious way of just wanting to like something that nobody else liked. But there is always in him, there is a kind of mystery as well as a theme, that there's something about him that, because he is always interested in these power relationships in Le Perron Terrible and The Maids, there's something else that's mysterious beneath the politics of it as well. So I am fascinated. I'm really interested that this is the moment that these people are being revived, and I am really interested of trying to do it in a different way. I have, as you know, slight reservations about Kip Williams and his technology, but I'm willing to suspend my disbelief and sit back and enjoy it a bit.
Speaking of technology then, and the world of social media, and this actually is in conversation with a previous podcast we did on Evita with Rachel Zegler when that opened in previews. One of the theatre stories that has gained a lot of tabloid attention this week was The Hunger Games, which opened for its first preview on Monday. And we both know that first previews can always be a turbulent experience. Often, you look at big venues, subsidized venues, they might cancel their first preview very quietly because they realize they need more time, and they'll nudge back the first performance by a day or two, and it flies under the radar and no one really questions it. However, here at the Hunger Games, they're opening a brand new theatre at the Troubadour Canary Wharf, and it was clear that they were very much up against it. And the audience weren't let in until after 7:30, so after the time the performance was meant to start. And the show then started at 8:30, so an hour late, and finished at 11:45 p.m. So I was out walking the dog, because I always walk the dog at night because she sleeps through the night, and getting notifications from friends that were there saying, "Oh, we finally finished."
Oh my goodness.
I think part of the problem, and this was something mentioned by the director Matthew Dunster in a speech he gave before the show, is that one of the cast had been taken ill earlier in the day, and they'd essentially tried to spend 2 hours reblocking, sorting it out so that the fight captain could do the scenes that the performer that had been taken ill had been doing, whilst swing read the lines off stage.
Crikey.
So essentially they were pulling out all the stops to make sure that that performance could go ahead for that 1,200 people that were desperate to see it. But sacrificing 2 hours the day before your first preview opens is, those hours count for so much before your first preview. You are so down to the wire that in a way they set themselves up for this negative press that has now suddenly appeared, because they were trying to make it work with that audience, but in the process of doing so, all the social media chatter about it being catastrophe or chaotic has sort of like almost is catnip for the tabloids who want to see a show fail, and they want to see a big brand show like the Hunger Games or Evita cause controversy. And that's exactly what has now happened with some of the headlines that have emerged in the Daily Mail or the Standard or elsewhere.
It is a peculiar vicious circle, this. So obviously people stage these shows because they want to welcome new audiences, have a brand name that's going to attract, you think that with Stranger Things or Hunger Games, you're going to get different people into the theatre. You're attracting people who might not ever go to see Chekhov, but would be excited to see a live version of this. And so that's why the newspapers then, mainstream media and in fact online media then focus on these big splashy shows. And then as soon as you've done that, the tension is, the stakes are so high. And previews are becoming a nightmare. It seems to me that theatres may have to consider having a run of previews that are not sold to the public before they get the public in, because that's what dance does. I always say this, dance never gets the luxury of actually trying anything on a stage, however complicated it is. It does it all secretly. It has a dress rehearsal and a technical rehearsal, which are open to friends of the show. So basically friends of whatever house it's going on in. And you are told going into those shows that the technology might fail, that the dancers might fall over, that they might stop the performance to sort something out. So you are not at any point, even though you've paid a certain amount of money for a ticket, expecting a finished show. And I think I may have told this story on the podcast before of taking my son to see Cinderella, and the moment when the Winter Fairy comes up from under the stage didn't work, and he just burst into tears because he thought it was so, tragic. He was so into the show, and then suddenly it didn't happen. But that's what you do, and you pay a small amount of money and you go along. It's not a preview. And then the opening night is the opening night, and that's it. So now you're in this weird position. First preview is effectively that dress rehearsal. It is effectively, if you buy a ticket for that thing, you should be told loads can go wrong. Loads and loads can go wrong. We have never really tried to put this before the public before. And, we can't be responsible. But it doesn't work like that. You just think, I am going to be the first person to see the Hunger Games, which is super exciting. So Everybody buys the ticket. And then the level of disappointment is so great, and the focus is so great, that you are in this sort of nightmare, really, of for the production. I think it would have been better if they cancelled it. But I don't know. What do you think?
It reminded me of the Sonia Friedman documentary that was made when Stranger Things opened in the West End. And she was adamant that they would not cancel that first preview because in her eyes, that meant failure.
Yeah.
And I think the team was so wedded to the idea of pleasing that 1,200 people that they never contemplated the alternative. I'd also say with a franchise like the Hunger Games, you're not just pleasing the 1,200 people in the room. There are hundreds of thousands of people waiting to hear every detail about what's happening in the plot, how they're staging certain scenes, what has been cut, what's the technology like, do I need to fly over to London to see this? so you're having to appease this huge online community as well as the people actually sitting in the room, and they kind of, like you say, you're in a lose-lose situation, because either you cancel the preview, suddenly it's a bit iffy and people are concerned, or you go ahead with a show that then people aren't convinced by, negative headlines. Stranger Things was lucky because they weren't also opening a brand new venue. Whereas here, they've got an entire new theatre to open at the same time as a brand new show. So every single aspect of that production is having to rely on infrastructure that might not necessarily be in place until the last minute. And as much as plays might delay their first preview, we know from any construction project ever that things never go to plan. Material might take too long to arrive. There might just be, the staff aren't there at the right moment to get the right things done. The right things might not have been installed in the toilets at the right time. One thing that this show now has as a challenge is to make sure it uses the rest of its preview period to get rid of those headlines that it's had from first preview. But the problem is, and this goes back to what we were saying about Evita, the public awareness of a show is formed from first preview now. It's not formed from opening night. People aren't going to wait for 3 weeks and then decide what their opinions are on the Hunger Games because they've seen the headline from preview one saying it's chaotic, it's got problems. And does that therefore mean that the production needed to handle its rollout better? Did it need to spend more time and open a bit later? Or even anticipate the fact that it might have taken longer to get the venue ready or the show ready and cut a few previews? Personally, and this is exactly what the National Theatre has done, it's what the Donmar Warehouse has done, it's what many theatres have done. If you cancel a preview or two, there's going to be a few hundred people that grumble online, but most people will understand it's so that the final product is better when the show finally opens. But they've chosen a different route, and I'm really intrigued now to see how that preview period progresses.
And actually, as we talk, and that the reason also with Sonia is like having a ticket for the first preview of one of these marquee shows, like Harry Potter actually was another Sonia. People wanted to be in on the very first preview. That was like a badge of success, that they have bought a ticket knowing that they will be the first in through the doors. And that's the other problem, because of course if you do cancel, then that those people who bought that ticket are going to end up seeing like the 20th preview or whatever. So there are real issues around it, and it has become very acute in a time where online sets the tone, and I think then the online that the media then pick up from the online almost. So the online is the dominant thing. When I was newspapers always just want a story, and a story is always better if it's something going wrong. And I do remember, in my multiple years working for newspapers, that was the focus was always that they wanted somebody to forget their lines, or the scenery not to work, or whatever. So everybody's waiting. But for quite a long time, theatre producers were also in control, because they could keep the press out of that preview, by and large, unless you happen to have bought a ticket, or they could effectively appeal to the audience, say, well, don't reveal too much because we're trying to do a launch. Online has ended that. There is no control that you as the producer can have over a show. And so I think it's a really interesting time, and it will become very acute. Places like Broadway, I mean, it's bad in the West End, as you say. Now, Hunger Games has to overcome all that in its preview period, because it needs a massive pre-sale. It needs to do well. So that's happening there. On Broadway, as we've talked about endlessly on this podcast, because of the economic pressures, it's true that, that if a show is closed by online comment in previews, I mean, that's just a disaster.
Yeah. The other example that it reminded me of was Burlesque, where when that had its first preview, there was all those comments about the costumes not being ready, or the audience having to wait outside for 40 minutes. And then press night rolls around, and it gets this wad of 5 and 4 star reviews, and everyone's like, oh no, actually it is quite good. So But even then, people were assessing the reviews based on what the initial tabloid reaction had been back during first preview. So even with the glowing reviews, it had to shed all that baggage that it had accumulated from first preview. One of the shows that it sounds like has got a better handle of it all is the West End premiere of Paddington the Musical. And they have been very upfront about the fact that before preview start, they are not saying anything about how they're going to put Paddington onto that stage and make the bear work. They are so secretive. They will not reveal an ounce of information about who even the designers behind the bear have not been disclosed. So we can't even infer how it's being made. Infer, is that a pun? Don't know.
Quite good. If it was, I'd go with it.
How the pair of cool. So that means that we're all in the dark. But the moment that first preview starts, they're going to send out the information. They've disclosed this. I'm not revealing that they're going. This is their press plan. They've said that they're going to tell everyone how the bear is being made during that first preview, so that by the time the show comes up and everyone has snapped the curtain call on their phones and they're putting out this grainy footage on TikTok, the rest of the world will already know how the bear is also being made. And that's great because it means that they control the narrative. They say, look, this is what we're doing with Paddington Bear. And it's not like it's someone's hot take on TikTok that starts to define the conversation, which is what's happening with the Hunger Games now.
Yeah, fascinating.
Gosh, we've gone on for so long talking about previews. I don't think we've even got time to talk about the Broadway strike. There's what to say. Well, we don't really know whether or not it will go ahead.
So it's the musicians are voting. It's interesting, though, isn't it? Because if they do go on strike, that would close Broadway.
Only the musicals, surely. Are there plays that could crack on?
Oh, interesting. I suppose so. I suppose any play without music, crack on.
Yes, so Godot could probably still...
Yeah, that's got music, but it's pre-recorded. It's got quite a lot of music, interestingly.
But it's still the big blockbuster musicals that will get hit, and they are obviously the ones that attract the big crowds.
Yeah, well, watch this space. So, we'll come back to this when we know a bit more.
This entire speculation could be null and void by the time that the podcast goes out, because the local 802 AFM union that handles all the musicians may have found some sort of resolution. But if not, then there might be a lot of musicals currently dark on Broadway.
I'm incredibly impressed.
We're having our cake and eating it.
I'm incredibly impressed you know the number of the union. I'm really impressed by that.
Oh, I do. Sometimes I make notes for this podcast. Not very often.
That must be apparent to everybody who ever listens to it. But on that chaotic note, thank you so much for listening to this week's instalment of the WhatsOnStage podcast with me, Sarah Crompton.
And me, Alex Wood. And Sarah, I've got to say before we close that your nails ahead of the wedding that you're going to look absolutely immaculate. I know that listeners won't be able to see that, but big thumbs up to your nails.
Thank you.
And yes, have a lovely week, listeners. And make sure you like, follow, subscribe, leave a comment and rave about the podcast wherever you can. We'll be back with main episodes every Friday and a smattering of bonus episodes in between.